In the silence of the hospital room, a faint movement suddenly broke through. His eyes opened. After 3 years in a coma, the boy, to everyone's astonishment, spoke. "It wasn't an accident," he said, his voice weak but resolute. The doctors froze. What did he mean? All eyes turned to the boy, who, after years of silence, revealed a truth no one expected to hear. Friends, what do you think about this? Share in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this incredible story unfolds. The hospital room was bathed in a dim glow, the steady hum of monitors the only sound in the silence. For 3 years, the boy had lain there, motionless, tethered to machines that quietly counted his heartbeat, his breaths, small, mechanical reminders of life. Nurses came and went, their routines precise and practiced, their expressions kind but distant. To them, he was just another patient, another case in the endless rhythm of care. But then, it happened. The boy's eyelids fluttered, barely perceptible at first. It might have been mistaken for a reflex, just another twitch in the body's involuntary dance. But then, his eyes opened. Dark and searching, they roved over the sterile room, taking in the unfamiliar world that had carried on without him. The heart monitor beeped faster, its rhythm changing enough to catch the attention of a nurse walking past the doorway. She stopped, her hand still clutching the clipboard, and stepped inside. "Doctor," she called softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "He's awake." The words sent a ripple through the ward. Within moments, the room was crowded with medical staff, their faces a mix of astonishment and curiosity. The lead physician, a tall man with sharp features and a practiced air of authority, moved to the boy's bedside. "Can you hear me?" the doctor asked, his voice calm but deliberate. He leaned closer, his gaze locked on the boy's unblinking eyes. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then, the boy's lips parted, his voice barely audible, as though it had been buried beneath layers of silence. "It wasn't an accident," he whispered. The room froze. Doctors and nurses exchanged startled glances, the weight of the words sinking into the sterile air. "What did he say?" one of the younger nurses asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. The doctor straightened, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" he asked the boy, his tone urgent now. "What wasn't an accident?" The boy's eyes flickered with a depth of emotion that no one expected, fear, pain, and something darker, something raw and unprocessed. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but the effort seemed too great. His head lolled slightly to the side, his energy spent. "Get a neuro-consult," the doctor ordered, his voice firm. "And inform his family. This changes everything." The medical team sprang into action, the room once again filled with the hum of controlled chaos. But beneath the flurry of activity, the boy's words lingered, like an unanswered question etched into the air. For 3 years, the world had moved on, assuming the boy's silence was eternal. Now, with just 5 words, he had shattered that silence and opened a door to a truth no one was prepared to face. The boy's words hung in the air like a ghost, echoing long after he had drifted back into an exhausted sleep. "It wasn't an accident." The phrase reverberated through the minds of everyone who had heard it, raising questions that begged for answers. The doctors debated its meaning, their voices low and urgent as they clustered in the hallway outside his room. His mother, however, couldn't stand the weight. She sat beside his bed, her hand gripping his smaller one, her eyes fixed on his face. It was a face she hadn't seen awake in 3 years, and yet it was unmistakably her son. There were subtle changes, the angles of his cheekbones sharper, the once boyish features now tinged with a hint of adolescence. But those eyes, wide and dark, held the same depth she remembered. "Baby," she whispered softly, her voice cracking. "What did you mean? What wasn't an accident?" The boy stirred, his fingers twitching slightly in her grasp. His eyes fluttered open again, slower this time, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just looked at her with a mixture of recognition and something else, something heavy. "I remember," he said finally, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Her heart clenched. "You remember what?" He took a shuddering breath, his words halting but deliberate. "The park, the voices, and the truck. It wasn't an accident. They wanted to hurt me." His mother froze, her blood turning to ice. She searched his face for clarity, hoping to find a hint of confusion, a mistake, anything that might explain away what he was saying. But the raw fear in his eyes told her he wasn't mistaken. The doctors insisted on a series of tests, their medical curiosity piqued by his sudden recovery. Neurological exams, scans, blood work, all meticulously performed as they tried to assess the state of his mind and body. But while the tests focused on his physical state, his words haunted them. "Do you think he could be hallucinating?" one doctor asked another as they pored over the results. "Possibly," the second replied. "But his vitals are stable, and there's no sign of brain damage. If this is a memory, it might be significant." Later that evening, his mother returned to his room, this time with his father in tow. The two parents had been separated for years, but the weight of their son's awakening had pulled them back into each other's orbit. His father, a quiet and stoic man, sat at the edge of the bed, his large hands trembling slightly as he reached for his son's arm. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "I'm here. We both are. Can you tell us more about what happened?" The boy's face contorted, his brow furrowing as he tried to piece together the fragments of his memory. "It was after school," he said, his voice steadier now. "I was walking home. I always walked the same way, through the park. But that day, there was a group of them. Older kids. They started following me." His mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They were shouting things," he continued, his voice faltering as he recalled the details. "Calling me names. They said I didn't belong. That I should go back to where I came from." His father's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with anger. "What happened next?" The boy hesitated, his breathing uneven. "I tried to ignore them, but they kept getting closer. Then one of them grabbed me. I fell, and then there was the truck. It came out of nowhere. I remember the headlights, and then nothing." The room fell silent, his words a chilling puzzle that no one could fully assemble. His mother began to cry softly, while his father stared at the floor, his fists clenched tightly. The doctors were brought into the loop, and the story only deepened the mystery. If the boy's memory was accurate, it suggested something far more sinister than an accidental injury. But the question remained, who were they, and why had no one come forward in the years since? "We need to get the authorities involved," his father said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "This wasn't an accident. Someone needs to answer for what happened to my son." The boy watched them, his face pale but resolute. Despite the fear etched into his features, there was something else there, too, a quiet strength, a determination to bring the truth to light, no matter how dark it might be. The boy's voice grew steadier with each passing day, but his words carried a weight that pressed heavily on everyone who heard them. As he recounted fragments of his life before the coma, a darker narrative began to emerge, one filled with moments of cruelty and isolation that no child should ever endure. He sat up in bed, the hospital blanket pulled tightly around him as if it could shield him from the memories. His parents sat nearby, their faces etched with worry and anger. The doctor, standing discreetly in the corner, jotted down notes, trying to piece together the boy's fragmented recollections. "It wasn't just the park," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the small crack in the wall. "It happened at school too. Every day." His mother leaned forward, her hand gripping his. "What happened, baby? You can tell us." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "The kids, they'd call me names. Stupid ones at first, like chocolate or shadow. But then it got worse. They'd push me in the hallway, laugh when I fell. They'd hide my stuff or write things on my locker. His voice cracked, and his father, who had remained silent, clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What kind of things?" his father asked, his tone sharp but controlled. The boy didn't meet his eyes. "Things like, you don't belong or go back to Africa. Sometimes worse." His mother gasped softly, her free hand covering her mouth. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I tried," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. "But the teachers didn't care. They just told me to ignore it, said kids would be kids." The room fell silent, the weight of his words filling every corner. His parents exchanged a look, both of them grappling with guilt and anger. How had they missed this? How had they let him suffer in silence? Over the next few days, more details came to light. He spoke of moments at recess when he would sit alone, pretending to read while the other kids played. He described the subtle ways the teachers treated him differently, how his mistakes were punished more harshly, his achievements overlooked. "There was this one time," he said, his voice small. "We were doing a group project, and I came up with this idea. It was a good idea. But when I told the teacher, she just smiled and gave it to someone else to present. They got all the credit." His mother shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "How could they do this to you?" she whispered. His father's anger burned hotter, his voice trembling as he said, "It wasn't just the kids, was it? It was the whole damn system." The boy nodded, his eyes glistening with tears he refused to let fall. "It felt like no one wanted me there. Like I was invisible, or worse, like they wished I wasn't." Outside the hospital, the small town painted a picture of quiet charm, tree-lined streets, quaint storefronts, and neatly trimmed lawns. But for the boy, it had been a place where prejudice lurked in every shadow. From the shopkeeper who watched him too closely to the neighbors who crossed the street when they saw him coming, his life had been marked by 1,000 small wounds that cut deeper than anyone realized. His parents began connecting the dots, revisiting moments they dismissed or overlooked. The time he came home with a torn backpack and a forced smile, claiming he'd tripped. The night he cried himself to sleep after a school assembly, refusing to explain why. The subtle but unmistakable fear in his eyes every morning as he left for school. "I thought I was protecting him," his father said one evening, his voice heavy with regret. "But I didn't see what was right in front of me." "You couldn't have known," his mother replied, though her own guilt was evident in her tone. "I should have," he insisted, his fists clenching again. "I should have asked more questions. I should have done more." The boy's memories painted a grim picture, but they also revealed his resilience. Despite the cruelty he endured, he had found ways to cope, to survive. His mother was especially moved when he spoke of the small joys that had kept him going, the librarian who always greeted him with a smile, the stray cat that would follow him partway home, the rare moments when he felt seen and valued. But even those moments couldn't erase the scars left by years of humiliation and bullying. As his parents listened, they realized that the accident, the coma, wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being told, in ways both subtle and overt, that he didn't belong. And now, as he sat before them, sharing his story with quiet courage, they vowed to make sure no one ever treated him that way again. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the machines monitoring the boy's recovery. He sat upright in his hospital bed, his small frame wrapped in a blanket, his face pale but determined. The memories were coming back slowly, like pieces of a shattered mirror reassembling themselves. Each fragment carried its own weight, its own pain. And now, he was ready to share the one that had haunted him most. "It was after school," he began, his voice soft but steady. His mother sat beside him, her hand clasped tightly around his, while his father stood nearby, his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. "I always walked home through the park, the boy continued. It was faster than the sidewalks, and there weren't as many people watching me. I didn't want to deal with them. Who? His father asked sharply. The kids, he said, his eyes darting downward. The ones who were always there. He described the way they had been waiting for him that day, a group of older boys lounging near the park's entrance. Their laughter had felt different, not carefree, but sharp and cruel, like they were already imagining what they would do to him. He had kept his head down, clutching his backpack tightly as he tried to walk past. They called out to me, he said, his voice faltering. They said things. About my skin. About how I didn't belong here. What did you do? His mother asked gently, her voice thick with emotion. I kept walking, he replied. But they followed me. His words came faster now, the memories spilling out as if they had been bottled up for too long. He described how the boys had surrounded him near the old oak tree in the middle of the park. How they had jeered and laughed, their taunts growing louder with each passing second. They pushed me, he said, his hands gripping the blanket tightly. One of them grabbed my backpack and threw it in the dirt. They said I was too slow, too stupid, that I should just leave. His father's fists tightened at his sides, his face darkening with anger. And then what? He asked, his voice trembling. They dared me to run, the boy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. They said if I could make it out of the park, they'd leave me alone. The boy paused, his breathing uneven as he struggled to continue. His mother rubbed his hand gently, offering silent encouragement. I ran, he said finally. I ran as fast as I could. But they chased me. He described the pounding of his heart, the sound of their laughter ringing in his ears. He remembered the uneven ground beneath his feet, the tree roots that threatened to trip him at every step. And then, he remembered the sound, a deep, guttural roar that didn't belong to the boys. It was the truck, he said, his eyes filling with tears. It came out of nowhere. His parents exchanged a startled glance, the implications of his words sinking in. The truck, his father pressed. What do you mean? I don't think it was an accident, the boy said, his voice shaking now. It wasn't just there by chance. It was like they knew. Like someone wanted to scare me. Or worse, his mother added softly, her voice filled with dread. The boy described how the truck had appeared at the edge of the park, its headlights cutting through the trees. It had been moving too fast, barreling toward him with a force that made the ground tremble. He had tried to stop, to turn, but the boys had blocked his path. They were laughing, he said, his voice cracking. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching. The last thing he remembered was the sound of the engine, deafening and relentless, and then the blinding light of the headlights as the truck bore down on him. And then, nothing, he said, his voice trailing off. Everything went black. The room fell silent, the weight of his story settling over everyone like a thick fog. His parents sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock and fury. The doctor, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, cleared his throat. This changes everything, the doctor said gravely. We need to contact the authorities. His father nodded, his expression hard. They tried to hurt my son. Maybe even kill him. Whoever was behind this, they're not getting away with it. The boy looked up at his parents, his eyes wide and pleading. Will they come after me again? He asked softly. His mother wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. Not if we have anything to do with it, she said firmly. As the boy rested his head against her shoulder, the first spark of hope flickered in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't facing this alone. Together, they would uncover the truth, and make sure those responsible faced justice. The next morning, the boy's parents sat in a small conference room at the hospital, the air thick with tension. Across from them sat the hospital administrator, a middle-aged man with a practiced smile and neatly pressed suit. Beside him, the head of security flipped through a folder, avoiding eye contact. "We appreciate your concern," the administrator began, his tone calm but dismissive. "However, we believe it's best to focus on your son's recovery. He's been through a traumatic ordeal, and revisiting the past may not be in his best interest." The boy's father leaned forward, his fists clenched on the table. "My son remembers being chased. He remembers a truck coming for him. That wasn't an accident, it was an attack. And we want answers." The administrator sighed, folding his hands on the table. "With all due respect, memories can be unreliable, especially after such a long coma. It's possible he's misinterpreting events or creating false recollections." His mother's voice cracked as she interjected, "He's not lying. He was bullied for years, and now he's telling us something terrible happened. Why won't you take this seriously?" "We're not dismissing your concerns," the administrator said, though his tone betrayed otherwise. "But there's no evidence to support these claims. Without concrete proof, there's little we can do." The frustration didn't end at the hospital. When the parents approached the school, they were met with a similar wall of resistance. The principal, a stern woman with a clipboard always in hand, sat behind her desk, her expression a blend of feigned sympathy and defensiveness. "We've reviewed our records," she said, flipping through a file. "There were no reports of bullying involving your son prior to the accident. If anything had been brought to our attention, we would have addressed it immediately." "That's a lie," the father said, his voice sharp. "My son told us he was targeted for years. You let it happen." The principal stiffened. "Mr. and Mrs. Adams, we strive to create a safe and inclusive environment for all students. If your son had issues, he should have spoken to a teacher or counselor." "He did," the mother snapped. "And he was ignored. Just like you're ignoring us now." The principal shifted uncomfortably, her facade cracking. "I understand this is difficult, but accusing the school of negligence without evidence is not productive." "Not productive," the father said, his voice rising. "My son almost died, and you want to sweep it under the rug because it's inconvenient for you." The principal stood, her expression hardening. "I suggest you focus on your son's well-being and let us handle our internal matters." Even the police, who they contacted with their concerns, seemed hesitant to pursue the case. The officer in charge, a weary-looking man with a notepad and a badge that had seen better days, listened to their account with little more than polite indifference. "We'll look into it," he said, jotting down a few notes. "But with no witnesses or physical evidence, it'll be hard to build a case. Do you have any names? Anything concrete we can use?" "Our son said he was chased by a group of boys in the park," the father replied. "Start there. Talk to the kids at the school." The officer sighed. "Kids aren't always reliable witnesses, and it's been 3 years. Most of them might not even remember." "That's your job," the mother said coldly. "Find them. Make them remember." "I'll file the report," the officer said with a shrug. "But don't get your hopes up. These things take time." As they left the station, the parents were consumed by a mix of fury and despair. Everywhere they turned, they were met with resistance, as if the world itself was conspiring to bury the truth. It wasn't just a lack of urgency, it was deliberate. The hospital, the school, the police, they all seemed more concerned with avoiding scandal than finding justice for their son. "They don't care," the mother said bitterly as they walked back to the car. "They just want this to go away." The father's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with determination. "Then we'll make them care." That night, as their son slept, they sat at the kitchen table, brainstorming their next move. They reached out to other parents, old classmates, and even local activists. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they weren't backing down. "We're not just fighting for him," the father said, his voice steady but fierce. "We're fighting for every kid who's ever been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. This isn't over." The boy sat upright in his hospital bed, his small frame swallowed by the sterile white sheets. His face, pale and gaunt from years of stillness, was now alive with a quiet but fierce determination. He had listened to his parents fight for him in the hallways, their raised voices echoing through the hospital corridors. He knew they were trying to make people believe him, but it wasn't enough. He needed to speak for himself. "I want to tell them," he said one evening, his voice weak but steady. His mother, seated beside him, looked startled. "Tell who, sweetheart?" "Everyone," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with a resoluteness she hadn't seen before. "The doctors, the police, the school. They need to hear it from me." His father, standing by the window, turned to face him. "Are you sure? You're still recovering. You don't have to do this now." "Yes, I do," the boy said firmly. "If I don't, they'll just keep ignoring it. They'll act like it didn't happen." The following day, his parents arranged a meeting with the hospital staff, including the attending physician, the social worker assigned to his case, and the police officer investigating the incident. The room was small and cramped, the air heavy with anticipation. The boy sat in a wheelchair, his hands gripping the armrests tightly as his parents wheeled him in. He felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the faces of the adults around him, some skeptical, some indifferent, but all waiting for him to speak. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly as he began. "I remember everything." He started from the beginning, describing the routine walk home through the park. He talked about the group of older boys who had been waiting for him, how their laughter had turned cruel, how they'd surrounded him, cutting off every path of escape. "They called me names," he said, his voice trembling. "They said I didn't belong here. That I was nothing." His mother reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away, needing to keep his focus. "They pushed me. They grabbed my backpack and threw it in the dirt. And then they dared me to run." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. The police officer scribbled notes furiously, his earlier indifference replaced by a sharp attentiveness. "I ran," the boy continued, his voice growing stronger. "But they chased me. They were laughing, like it was all a game to them. Then I heard the truck." His breath hitched as he described the sound of the roaring engine, the blinding glare of the headlights. "It didn't slow down," he said, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It just came right at me. And they didn't move. They didn't try to help. They just stood there, watching." When he finished, the room remained silent. The social worker looked visibly shaken, her pen hovering over her notepad. The attending physician exchanged a glance with the officer, who cleared his throat awkwardly. "That's a lot to take in," the officer said finally. "But your memory, are you sure it's accurate? After so much time." "I know what happened," the boy said firmly, cutting him off. His voice, though small, carried an undeniable conviction. "It wasn't an accident. They wanted to hurt me." Over the next few days, his words began to ripple outward. The social worker arranged for a counselor to help him recount his story in greater detail, creating a clearer picture of the events leading up to the incident. The police began re-interviewing old witnesses, cross-referencing his account with reports from the time of the accident. To his surprise, his bravery inspired others to come forward. A younger student, now in a different school, admitted to seeing the group of boys in the park that day. Another parent shared that their child had been bullied by the same group but had been too afraid to speak up. The boy's story became a catalyst, forcing the adults around him to confront a truth they had been too comfortable ignoring. It wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern of cruelty, a deliberate act of violence born from prejudice. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting interview, the boy lay back in his bed, his energy drained. His father sat beside him, pride evident in his eyes. "You're doing something amazing," his father said quietly. "You're making them listen." "I just want it to stop," the boy murmured, his eyelids heavy. For me. For everyone. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. It will, he said. Because of you, it will. As the boy drifted off to sleep, his voice remained in the minds of everyone who had heard it, a testament to the power of truth, no matter how painful or difficult it might be. The investigation began with hesitation and doubt, but it didn't take long for the cracks in the system to reveal themselves. What started as a single boy's account of a harrowing day in the park quickly spiraled into something much larger, a story of prejudice and negligence woven into the very fabric of the institutions meant to protect him. The first breakthrough came from a retired teacher who had worked at the boys' school years ago. She approached his parents quietly, her hands trembling as she handed them a folder of notes she'd kept. Inside were records of complaints she had filed about the very same group of boys who had targeted their son. I tried to report them, she explained, her voice tinged with regret. But every time I did, the administration brushed it off. Boys will be boys, they'd say. I thought if I kept speaking up, someone would listen. But no one ever did. The notes detailed years of incidents, bullying, racial slurs, and even physical altercations, all downplayed or ignored by the school's leadership. Her testimony became the foundation of a case that was quickly growing beyond a single incident. As news of the investigation spread, more witnesses began to step forward. A local shopkeeper remembered seeing the group of boys hanging around the park that day, their voices loud and taunting. A jogger who often ran the same route mentioned how she'd seen them harass other kids before, always targeting those who looked different. One of the most damning accounts came from a former student who had transferred schools after enduring similar treatment. They made my life hell, he admitted during an interview with the investigators. I tried to tell the principal, but they just told me to toughen up. I left because I couldn't take it anymore. His words echoed the boy's own experiences, painting a grim picture of a school that had turned a blind eye to repeated acts of cruelty. The deeper the investigators dug, the more systemic the problem appeared. Patterns emerged, disparities in how disciplinary actions were applied, with students of color facing harsher consequences for minor infractions. Reports of teachers dismissing complaints about bullying or, worse, participating in subtle acts of discrimination themselves. The data painted a clear picture: this wasn't just about a few bad actors. The entire system was complicit. The school district's response was predictably defensive. At a hastily organized press conference, the superintendent stood behind a podium, her expression stiff as she read from a prepared statement. We are committed to fostering an inclusive environment for all students. Any allegations of misconduct will be thoroughly investigated. But behind closed doors, the story was different. Internal emails leaked to the press revealed a frantic effort to control the narrative. Minimize public backlash, one email read. Focus on the boys' recovery, not the school's policies. The community, however, was no longer willing to stay silent. Parents began sharing their own stories at town hall meetings, recounting how their children had been mistreated or ignored. Local activists joined the cause, organizing rallies and demanding accountability not just from the school but from the broader institutions that had allowed such injustices to persist. The boy's family, once hesitant to draw attention, became a driving force behind the movement. His father spoke passionately at a community forum, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This isn't just about my son, he said. This is about every child who's been told they don't belong. About a system that's failed to protect the most vulnerable. We can't let this continue. His words resonated, igniting a fire in the audience. By the end of the meeting, dozens of parents had signed a petition calling for a full audit of the school district's policies and practices. The boy, though still recovering, watched the events unfold with a mix of pride and disbelief. His story had become a catalyst for change, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about their community. One afternoon, his mother brought him a stack of letters that had been sent to the hospital. They were from other kids, some from his school, others from across the country. Thank you for speaking up, one letter read. Because of you, I'm not afraid to tell my story. The boy held the letters tightly, his chest swelling with a sense of purpose. He had spoken out to stop his own pain, but now he realized he had started something far bigger. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the fight for justice was just beginning. But for the first time, the boy and his family weren't alone. They had a community behind them, united in their demand for accountability and change. The confession came on a gray, overcast afternoon, the kind of day where the clouds seemed to press down on the world. It happened in a small interrogation room at the local police station, its stark walls and flickering fluorescent light adding to the tension. Seated at the metal table was one of the boys who had been in the park that day, now a young man, older but visibly nervous. His name was Mark, and for weeks he had refused to speak to investigators beyond denying any involvement. But the mounting evidence and relentless questioning had finally cracked his resolve. His leg bounced under the table as he avoided the detective's gaze, his hands twisting together in his lap. "Mark," the detective said, his tone calm but firm. "We already know you were there. Witnesses have placed you in the park, and we've got the timeline to prove it. What we need now is the truth. If you keep lying, this only gets worse for you." Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced at his court-appointed lawyer, who gave him a slight nod. Taking a shaky breath, he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he said. The detective leaned in, his pen poised over a notepad. "What wasn't supposed to go that far?" Mark hesitated, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of his secret was crushing him. "That day. The truck. It wasn't an accident. We planned it." The detective's pen froze mid-sentence. The room seemed to hold its breath. "You planned it," he repeated, his voice even but tinged with urgency. "Explain what you mean." Mark's words spilled out in a rush, as if he were trying to rid himself of the burden. "We didn't mean to hurt him, not like that. We just wanted to scare him, you know. Teach him a lesson. He was always walking through the park like he owned it, acting like he belonged there. We wanted him to stop." The detective's jaw tightened, but he let Mark continue. "We dared him to run," he said, his voice cracking. "We told him we'd leave him alone if he made it out of the park. And then Jake said he'd call his cousin, the one with the truck." The pieces started to fall into place. Jake's cousin had been the one behind the wheel, deliberately speeding through the park to terrify the boy. But something had gone wrong. The boy hadn't been able to get out of the way in time, and the game had turned into a near-fatal tragedy. "Did you know what Jake's cousin was planning to do?" the detective pressed. Mark shook his head vehemently, his voice panicked. "No. I mean, I knew he was bringing the truck, but I thought it was just to scare him. I didn't think he'd actually, you know." The detective's gaze hardened. "But you still went along with it. You still chased him, surrounded him, and dared him to run." Mark nodded miserably, tears streaming down his face now. "I didn't think he'd get hurt. I swear. We were just messing around." "Messing around," the detective repeated, his voice sharp. "A boy almost died because of you. He's been in a coma for 3 years. And you're calling that, messing around?" Mark broke down completely, his sobs echoing in the small room. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he choked out. "I didn't mean it." The confession became the turning point in the case. With Mark's testimony, the investigators were able to piece together the full story of what had happened that day. Jake and his cousin were brought in for questioning, and with the pressure mounting, they folded as well, corroborating Mark's account. The truth was as devastating as it was enraging. The attack had been born out of prejudice, a cruel game orchestrated by boys who saw the boy as an outsider. It wasn't just bullying, it was a deliberate act of violence, fueled by a deep-seated belief that he didn't belong. When the boy's parents were informed of the confession, their reactions were a mixture of relief and fury. They had fought for so long to uncover the truth, and now that they had it, it only underscored the depth of the injustice their son had endured. They thought they could get away with this, the father said, his voice trembling with anger. They thought his life didn't matter. His mother wiped away tears, her hand resting on her son's shoulder. But they were wrong, she said softly. He mattered. And now the world knows it. The confession sent shockwaves through the community. What had once been dismissed as an unfortunate accident was now revealed as a calculated act of cruelty. Protests erupted outside the school and the local government offices, with parents and activists demanding accountability not just for the boys involved but for the institutions that had allowed such behavior to fester. For the boy, hearing the truth was both painful and empowering. It validated his memories, his voice, and his fight for justice. As he sat with his parents, watching the news coverage of the case, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. They thought they could silence me, he said quietly. But they couldn't. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with a mix of reporters, community members, and families who had come to witness the culmination of a battle for justice. The air buzzed with anticipation as the judge entered, calling the court to order. At the center of it all sat the boy and his family, their faces a blend of steely determination and quiet exhaustion. They had fought tirelessly for this moment, but they knew it was only the beginning. The trial had been long and grueling, filled with painful testimony and damning evidence. The confessions of the perpetrators, combined with witness accounts and investigative findings, painted a chilling picture of what had happened that day in the park. It wasn't just an act of reckless bullying, it was a deliberate attempt to harm, fueled by prejudice and cruelty. The prosecution was relentless, presenting the case with unwavering clarity. They highlighted the systematic failures that had allowed the boys' behavior to escalate unchecked, the school's indifference, the community's silence, and the lack of accountability at every level. These actions were not isolated, the lead prosecutor said during closing arguments. They are the result of a culture that tolerates discrimination, that minimizes the pain of those who are different. This is our chance to say, no more. When the verdicts were read, a hush fell over the courtroom. The main perpetrators, including the driver of the truck, were found guilty of multiple charges, including aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. Sentences ranged from juvenile detention for the younger participants to prison time for the older ones, particularly the driver. The boy's family held hands tightly as the judge delivered the final statements. Justice had been served, at least in part. But as they left the courtroom, the boy's father turned to the reporters gathered outside, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "This isn't just about our son," he said. "It's about every child who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. This isn't the end of the fight, it's the beginning." The impact of the case rippled far beyond the courtroom. The boy's story had become a rallying cry, sparking conversations about systemic racism and the failure of institutions to protect the vulnerable. At the school, parents demanded accountability, holding the administration responsible for ignoring years of bullying and discrimination. Under mounting pressure, the school board announced sweeping reforms. Anti-bias training was implemented for teachers and staff, a dedicated counselor was hired to address student concerns, and a new reporting system was established to ensure incidents of bullying and discrimination would no longer be ignored. The boy's family played a pivotal role in these changes. They attended town hall meetings, met with school officials, and worked with advocacy groups to push for meaningful action. The father, who had once felt powerless in the face of his son's suffering, became a passionate advocate for change. "I used to think one voice couldn't make a difference," he said at a community forum. "But my son's voice proved me wrong. Now, it's up to all of us to keep that momentum going." For the boy, life slowly began to return to a new kind of normal. He still carried the physical and emotional scars of what he had endured, but he walked through the school halls with his head held high, knowing he had fought for something bigger than himself. One afternoon, as he sat in class, his teacher handed him a letter. It was from another student, one he didn't know, who had been inspired by his story. Because of you, I finally told someone about what I was going through, the letter read. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters too. The boy folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his backpack. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't walking it alone. As his family gathered around the dinner table that evening, the conversation shifted from court dates and meetings to lighter topics, school projects, favorite movies, and plans for the weekend. For the first time in years, laughter filled the room. But even in this moment of peace, they all understood their fight wasn't over. There were still systems to challenge, stories to uncover, and changes to demand. They had won a battle, but the war against injustice was ongoing. As the boy's father raised his glass, he looked at his family with pride. To a better future, he said. The boy smiled, his heart filled with a quiet but unshakable hope. To a better future, he echoed. The sun streamed through the windows of their home, casting warm, golden light over the breakfast table. The boy sat at the head, his schoolbooks neatly stacked beside his plate. His mother fluttered around the kitchen, packing his lunch, while his father sipped coffee and flipped through the newspaper. It was an ordinary morning, yet it felt extraordinary. After years of pain and struggle, life was finally moving forward. Ready for your first day back? His father asked, folding the paper and setting it aside. The boy nodded, his smile tentative but genuine. I think so. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You've got this. Just remember, you've already faced the hardest part. This is your chance to show the world how strong you are. Returning to school felt strange at first. The building, with its familiar halls and classrooms, seemed both unchanged and entirely different. Some students greeted him warmly, others offered shy smiles, and a few avoided his gaze altogether. But what stood out most was the respect in the air, a stark contrast to the isolation he had once felt. In the months since the trial, the school had undergone a transformation. Anti-bullying posters lined the walls, new programs had been implemented, and students were encouraged to speak up about their experiences. The boy's story had become a turning point, forcing the school and community to confront long-ignored issues. During his first lunch back, a younger student approached him hesitantly. "Can I sit here?" the boy asked, clutching his tray nervously. "Of course," he said, scooting over to make room. The boy sat down and began to speak quietly. "I just wanted to say, thank you. For what you did. It made things better for a lot of us." The boy's chest swelled with a mix of pride and humility. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just promise me you'll speak up if you ever see something wrong. Don't wait like I did." Outside of school, his life continued to blossom. He joined a local youth group dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion, where he shared his story with others who had faced similar struggles. His voice, once silenced by fear, had become a powerful tool for change. One day, he was invited to speak at a community event. Standing on a small stage, microphone in hand, he looked out at the crowd, a sea of faces, young and old, all listening intently. "I didn't think I mattered," he began, his voice steady. "I thought no one cared about what was happening to me. But I was wrong. My voice mattered, and so does yours. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The applause was thunderous, but what stayed with him most were the conversations afterward, the people who approached him with tears in their eyes, thanking him for his courage, sharing their own stories, and vowing to fight for change in their own communities. At home, life felt lighter. Dinner conversations were filled with laughter, and his parents seemed more at ease, their worry lines softened by relief. They had weathered the storm together, and now they were stronger for it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his father turned to him and said, "You've done something incredible. You've given people hope." The boy shrugged, his cheeks flushing. "I just told the truth. And that's what makes it so powerful," his mother added. "The truth can change the world." The boy's journey was far from over, but it was no longer defined by pain and fear. He had turned his struggles into strength, his voice into a force for good. And in doing so, he had become a symbol of resilience and hope, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and believe in the possibility of change. What do you think about this incredible journey? Did it resonate with you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Together, we can explore more inspiring stories and keep the conversation alive. Thank you for being a part of this journey.